Is the UFC using shady business practices to keep Nate Diaz on the roster? I mean, obviously, Nate Diaz wants to fight out his contract and go to greener pastures. And obviously, the UFC wants him to re-sign or to remain on the roster because obviously he's a big moneymaker. There are all kinds of managers out there, talent managers, fight managers, who have their fighters, have their talent sign these contracts that basically keep them beholden to their manager for their entire careers. And it almost looks like the UFC is kind of doing the same thing to their fighters. I mean, this situation is kind of rare. It doesn't happen all the time. Obviously, you have to be kind of a big money maker for the UFC to try to keep you on the roster because, if you're not making them money, they will probably just get rid of you, cut you, or let you go, or let you fight out your contract. But in certain cases, like the Nate Diaz situation, they are trying to keep, it looks like they're trying to keep him on the roster. They're trying to get him to re-sign. And Nate Diaz obviously wants to fight out his contract. I mean, there are a lot of fighters that the UFC let go or who have fought out their contract and who are now making a lot more money than they were while they were fighting for the UFC. So obviously there's going to be fighters, especially fighters that bring in big money, that are going to want to go somewhere else if they're not getting paid what they believe they should be getting paid. And that is the case with Nate Diaz. I think there should be some kind of regulation that allows the fighters, especially when they get to a certain level, to have a little bit of say in who they fight. I mean, apparently Nate Diaz and Dustin Poirier agreed to a fight, but it didn't go through. I'm not sure the reason why it didn't go through. It could be because the UFC doesn't want that fight. It could be because Nate Diaz or Dustin Poirier, something happened with them. I really don't know, but from what it looks like, they are trying to keep Nate Diaz in. They're trying to get him to re-sign with the UFC. I mean, there are plenty of ways that the UFC can use to keep fighters in the organization. They apparently, allegedly, according to certain contracts and according to Dana White and other fighters have corroborated, that the UFC has to offer fighters 3 fights a year. Okay, apparently there's nothing in the contract that says they have to offer different fighters, so they can basically offer the same fighter 3 times. And it's happened before where, fighters get offered a fight and they don't accept it because they're injured or because the timing's not right, or they're not on weight, or any number of reasons, and then it was offered, a couple months later, and the fight was accepted and the fight went through. So they can't offer him the same fighters. Are they doing that to Nate Diaz? Maybe they are. Maybe they're offering him to fight, Chimaev, and that's the only person they're offering him 3 times a year. And Nate Diaz, I guess, doesn't want to fight Chimaev. I'm not sure why he doesn't. I think it is. Oh, yeah, Chimaev. I get confused by, Chimaev and Makachev. But yeah, Chimaev. So maybe I don't think Nate, according to Nate Diaz, he doesn't want to fight somebody that's below him. That's, I guess, not going to do much for his career. Personally, I think it would do a lot for his career if he were able to beat Chimaev. But Chimaev is a beast, and maybe Nate Diaz knows that. He doesn't want to go out on a loss, maybe. I'm not sure. In Chimaev's last fight, it was shown that he's not invincible. So, I think probably the best route for Nate Diaz to go would be to accept that fight Chimaev, and just get out of the organization. But apparently he doesn't want that. He thinks the UFC just wants to use him as a stepping stone to, push Chimaev into the spotlight more than he is. He claims that that's what they did with Jorge Masvidal. And if it wasn't for, according to Nate Diaz, if it wasn't for him, Masvidal wouldn't have got the success that he got. But there are also other ways the UFC can get fighters to not accept fights. Last minute fights. A lot of times fighters don't want to take because it's last minute and they're not prepared. They could offer fights when they know the fighter is injured but not but not restricted from fighting. So there are many ways the UFC can use to not have a fighter accept a fight. And I don't know if they're using these ways with Nate Diaz, but if they are, that's not cool. And that's why I think there should be some kind of regulation. When you get to a certain level, that the fighter should also have a little bit of say in who they fight. Because if they had that regulation, there would be a little bit more leverage for the fighter. As it stands, the UFC has all the leverage. The fighter has everything to lose. They every day when you're a fighter matters, because there's a shelf life for fighting. You get to a certain age, your body can't withstand the training, can't, doesn't have the same speed, the reflexes as when you're young, and it's a lot more difficult to find success when you're older. So every day for a fighter is valuable. They need to, fight when they're young. They need to be able to do this when they're as young as possible. So the longer time it goes that someone is stuck behind a contract without fighting, the worse off it is for them. The UFC is fine. The UFC, it doesn't matter how old they get. It doesn't matter if they don't have reflexes, if they're not as fast, if their bodies are older. It doesn't matter, because they're making money off of the fighters, not off of their bodies. The fighters are making money off of their bodies, their strength, their quickness, all that kind of thing. So it's a lot worse for the fighters than it is for the UFC when a fighter is standing still. So I definitely think there should be some kind of regulation, like the Poirier Diaz, if they really did want to fight each other and it would have went through, if the UFC would have accepted it, I think that should have happened. Like, the fighter should have a little bit of leverage, because when the organization has all the leverage, that's kind of an unfair advantage. And sometimes the organization acts like, if it wasn't for us, you wouldn't be where you were at. But if it wasn't for the fighters, the UFC wouldn't be where they were at either. It's a mutual beneficial relationship. They can't claim that it's only beneficial for the fighter, because that's not the case. It's beneficial for the UFC to have these fighters as well, because these, big fighters who are bringing in all this money are bringing attention to the organization. Otherwise, they wouldn't be doing all these things that they are for people like, what's the dude's name with the green hair? Just went blank on that. But guys like him, young guy who brings in all this young money, they, bend over backwards for him. Why? Because he has a lot of leverage. He brings in a lot of young money. Basically, my point is, it's a mutual beneficial relationship. One shouldn't have all the leverage over the other. And I think that would solve a lot of problems. Obviously, the situation's not going to happen all the time, because 95% of the fighters are probably not going to be in the situation where they're a huge money draw and they're trying to fight out their contract, because there are only, a handful of fighters who are huge money draws. The majority of fighters, the UFC can just let go, or they can let them fight out their contract, and it won't really bother them, because they're not huge money makers. So obviously the situation is rare and doesn't happen all the time. But obviously it does happen. And I could understand why Nate Diaz would want to get out. I mean, there are plenty of fighters right now who are still under contract, but they're, getting older and they don't fight. They retired from fighting, but people change their mind. It's like, oh, at that moment, they're like, I'm never going to fight again. So I don't care if I still have fights left on my contract. So I'm not going to fight out my contract. But people change their mind, minds change all the time. It's like, at this moment, I'm never going to fight again. And then, a couple months down the line, a year, 2 years, 3 years, it's like, man, I want to fight again. But these fighters who are still under contract at the UFC can never fight again until they fight out their contract with the UFC. So the smart way to do it would always be to fight out your contract, because if later on down the line you change your mind, you can, and you can fight for another organization. But like I said, there are a lot of fighters. I think GSP, I think Habib, But there are plenty out there who are still under contract from the UFC, and the UFC knows this, obviously, and they want to, make much money as they can, and sometimes they'll allow fighters to go. I think they did it with Diego Sanchez. Actually, I think they let Diego Sanchez go, and but anyway, with certain fighters, I think, it was they let somebody fight for BKFC, which was a cool thing to do. But yeah, I guess with some fighters, they even if they didn't fight out their contract, they still allow them to fight, which is a good thing. But this kind of thing where they're kind of just like stalling and keeping a person on the contract, I don't know if that's the situation. We really don't know. Obviously Nate Diaz don't want to fight some young up and comer and ruin his brand, because that's obviously a thing. Like the UFC doesn't want to ruin their brand, well, fighters don't want to ruin their brand either. And that could be the case if they possibly take some of these fights that the UFC is offering. Anyway, let me know what you guys think. Do you guys think that the UFC is wrong for keeping Nate Diaz signed to the organization and not allowing him to fight out his contract with somebody who he wants to fight with? Do you think there should be some kind of regulation for when you get to these top levels, the fighters should have some kind of say in who they fight? I know they allow them to have, some kind of say when they still have plenty of fights left on their contract. But when it comes to something like this, when they only have one left, there should be some kind of regulation. Let me know what you guys think. Thanks for watching. Take care. See you next time. Peace.